for law enforcement in finding these two was one thing. The bigger question was why Vicky White would have done this. Why would she risk everything in her life, everything for this guy? I mean, he was a violent offender. None of this makes sense. Everyone was sort of in disbelief.
This is not the Vicky White we know, by any stretch of the imagination.
At the start of reporting the story, I assumed that Vicky was in some way the victim. But the more I learn, the more I realize she was a lot more interesting than that.
It is a case that reads like a Hollywood movie, but it is very real and it is tragic. A case that brought international intrigue. Where was accused murderer Casey White, and why did the corrections officer Vicky White help him escape that day? Casey White was already serving a 75-year sentence for prior convictions of a home invasion and a carjacking. He was set to go to trial for the murder in 2015 and the death of a woman named Connie Ridgway, a mother and grandmother who lived in Alabama. Well, 11 days between April and May of 2022, we learned of this secret love affair between the inmate and the guard. And tonight, NewsNation will unveil some new security footage and interviews from Vicky White's colleagues, and one of her former colleagues joining us now also was a close friend of Vicky White. It's retired Lauderdale County Sheriff Rick Singleton. Sheriff, thank you as always. You've written a book chronicling what those 11 days were like for you, for the department. It's called Manhunt, the search for Vicky and Casey White, the good, the bad, the ugly. Sheriff, you've always been generous with your time. You lived this nightmare for your county and for your department, and you call those 11 days the worst in your career. As you look back now and recount it, what did you want to set straight with the record?
Well, first of all, primarily, Marni, I wrote the book to preserve the story for historical significance that it brings to this county. This is probably the most historically significant law enforcement event ever to happen in Lauderdale County. And, future generations will be talking about this, and I wanted to make sure they had a factual resource that they could go to get the facts about what actually happened. And I thought, who better to share that story than myself, because it was my responsibility. I was the man responsible for seeing that Casey White was recaptured. He was in my custody when he left with Vicky, and it was on me.
With the benefit of hindsight, Sheriff, is there anything, knowing what you know now, that you would have done differently then?
Well, absolutely, and that's one thing I talk about in my book. Is toward the end of the book, I go into how this happened, and I refer to it as the perfect storm. It was more than just about Vicky being an employee of the jail. There were so many factors that enabled her to walk him right out of the jail, and some of those were addressed before I left office, as far as policy changes. And job descriptions. The biggest issue was I had just given too much authority to Vicky in the transport of inmates. There was really no system of checks and balances, and that's on me.
The other thing that you wanted to do, I understand, with the book is share with people who Vicky really was. Can you pull back that curtain a little bit? Your friend, more than just your colleague, who she was and how you want her to be remembered?
Well, she was a very hard worker, a very committed employee to her job. She was there before she was supposed to be. She was early to work and late to leave. The employees depended on her for her leadership and guidance. The inmates respected her. She was firm but fair. And, Brian alluded a little earlier to her being a victim. In my opinion, she was really more of a victim than she was a perpetrator. You can't excuse what she did. But Vicky was a victim of Casey White's manipulation. He got into her head, and she would never have done this if he had not manipulated.
And in court, he said he loved Vicky. He wanted to apologize to her family. He also will now spend the rest of his life behind bars, sitting with what he did. How did that land with you, hearing his statements in court about her, your friend?
Well, it's upsetting because I don't think he's sincere about it at all. Within a week after he was back in prison, he was already communicating with half a dozen other women. Those women putting money on his commissary account. To me, it wasn't sincere. I don't think he really loved her. He used her to get what he wanted.
Yeah, hard to know what is truth. He also admitted that he had killed someone else while he was on the run with Vicky in Indiana, something he told NewsNation. We have not been able to authenticate that story, and police say that he is lying about that. Former Lauderdale County Sheriff Rick Singleton, thank you, sir, as always. I know retirement, or at least I hope retirement is treating you well after a career-ending case that we are still talking about today.
Thank you so much, Marni.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.